good morning and welcome to the VSA Capital 5-Minute Morning Miner on Thursday, the 13th of February. One day to go to Valentine's Day, so do rush out and get a card today at the bare minimum. I just do the bare minimum. Actually, today we haven't got Paul, we haven't got Ollie. I've just got David Scriven, my head of sales. Morning, David.
Good morning, Andrew. How are you?
Have you got a card?
Of course I've got a card. Have you booked the flowers?
No, we don't do flowers. How long have you been married, David?
Very good. How about I share a few quick thoughts with you and then...
No, I asked you a question. How long have you been married? Come on. Can you remember? I can't remember.
15 years.
15?
Yeah.
That's a lie.
Correct, because my daughter's 18.
I'm coming up for my 34th wedding anniversary, but there we go. Anyway, right, moving on to mining. Look, we haven't got an analyst, so we're not really messing around. We've got some really serious stuff to do here, actually. Look, the first one today, the big one, or the monster or whatever, was South 32 that had interim results. And actually, I mean, look, I don't want to go into the detail of it because, frankly, it's above my pay grade. But the bottom line is the market marked it up about 4% over in the States overnight. So clearly liked it. And I think the big mining groups are looking pretty powerful at the moment. I would be, and with commodity prices starting to perk up, I would suggest that the big mining groups could be collectively a pretty good place to be putting your money, although people obviously are still very nervous of resources for numerous reasons. But we do see this sort of sector movement sometimes. I mean, we both keep a good eye open on the general market because actually if you'd invested in European banks over the last 2 years, you'd have pretty much matched the performance of the Magnificent Seven. If you'd collectively bought the, well, I'm not sure about Magnificent, but the 47 European banks, they've actually performed pretty much in line. They've all had phenomenal performance. So sometimes you see this sector move, and I could quite easily see that the mining majors going through a similar sort of sector re-rating. But that's South 32 for you. Now, whilst talking on big ones, have you got a comment on Barrick, David?
Well, yes, following your theme there, Barrick reported 69% increase in net earnings to 2.1 billion. And they've got very robust free cash flow. It doubled to 1.32 billion. And it wasn't just the precious metal price, the gold price. It was an increase in production as well, both in the gold side and copper too. They've got a buyback program, and I think that those results beat analysts' expectations, and the stock moved strongly higher. So it complements what you were saying earlier. But also bear in mind that in Barrick's case, on the webinar with analysts, the analysts were questioning whether Barrick should concentrate more on North American assets to compete with the market multiples and profiles enjoyed by Agnico Eagle. So that was an interesting observation.
Very good. A couple of little ones I might just mention. Ionic Rare Earths had a bit of news out. We've mentioned this a few times because we're quite interested in what they're doing over in Northern Ireland, creating a magnet recycling business. They now seem to be doing one also in South Korea. I suppose my one concern would be, they're quite a small little company, Ionic Rare Earths. They're a very small company. Seem to be trying to do an awful lot. So I hope they can manage everything. And then the other one I was just going to quickly mention as a sort of small snippet this morning was Empire Metals. I know a lot of people have got very excited about this. But they had some MET testing results, so and it's marked the share price up a few pence, so it's worth noting. Now, also, whilst I'm just talking, I'm reading the FT this morning. There's a really interesting article, actually. I do recommend reading it, funny enough, on Indonesia and nickel. And the reason I mention it is, they put in it actually one really quite staggering statistic, and that is that in 2015, global nickel supply from Indonesia was about 6%. Today, it is 61%. In other words, Indonesia absolutely controls the nickel market. And yet nickel, of course, is pretty vital for the energy transition. So, I think we need to sort of wake up about that a little bit and also look around maybe for nickel plays outside Indonesia that can actually get into production. And, of course, we are seeing globally, and we were chatting about this, David, that certain commodities now are being, well, controlled or restricted, particularly by the Chinese, so to speak. I'm a bit of a tungsten buff, but you were talking to me about tungsten, weren't you, David?
Yeah, so as we know, China announced that it was employing export restrictions on tungsten. Now, the Canadian listed Almonty shares leapt on that news from about $1.20 to $1.90, a huge move higher. But EQ Resources, which we've been keeping an eye on, where we've done podcasts on, was not trending in the same vein, but it's started to pick up and some good volume. So maybe keep an eye on that.
Yeah, look, we do like EQ Resources. We think it's good management. They have 2 sites in production. I mean, having production is such a key as well. Obviously, in the UK, people tend to focus on Tungsten West when they're looking at tungsten. Unfortunately, as we do regularly remind, because of the way these convertible bonds are out there, the bonds swamp the equity. The equity really doesn't have any value, unfortunately. It's all down to the bondholders. I am, of course, a bondholder myself, although I'm not putting any more money into it. But I do think that I had a meeting with the CEO down at Indaba, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised by some of the things he was doing, basically because actually he somewhat agreed with a lot of the things that I was suggesting, which is nice. But I think he's got an interesting new plan, which is good, and that's what this company needs, is a completely new plan. Unfortunately, they've been sort of going round and round in circles, driven by their investors more so than the actual management. And that's never a good thing. But just be careful of the equity. Fine, you can trade it if you want, because it goes up and down like I'm not allowed to say that word. And that's probably, unless you've got anything else. I mean, gold's still back up above 2,900, David. Commodities do feel a bit stronger, don't they? Have you got any final wonderful view that you don't often get a chance to come on this podcast? Is there anything you want to say to really get your message out there?
No, I'll mention an extraordinary thing. It is following the call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, a name that you wouldn't have been following, leapt 29%. United Rusal, which is listed in Hong Kong.
Well,
That one caught you out, didn't it?
Yeah, it did actually. I've got a lot of views on the whole Ukraine situation and where Europe ends up in it, but it does look as though things are happening there, if nothing else. So let's hope, because actually we quite like peace, just because war is not a good thing. People die unnecessarily. It costs a bloody fortune, and it just isn't healthy. I'm not a big fan of that. Right, thank you for coming on, David. Much appreciated. And unfortunately, you'll be put on the sidelines and back on the bench tomorrow. But thanks.
Thanks.
This podcast has been produced and edited by VSA Capital. It is intended for information purposes and not as investment advice. The information is intended for recipients who understand the risks associated with equity investments in smaller companies. Please do your own research and do not rely on a single source when making an investment decision. VSA Capital may derive fees from this content and seeks to do business with the companies mentioned.